In the year 2147, Earth was no longer the vibrant blue and green world it once was. Decades of wars, pollution, and overuse of resources had left it barren and lifeless. The air was thick with dust, rivers ran dry, and cities lay in ruins. Humanity clung to survival by a thread. Leaders from around the globe came together to form the Global Council, an assembly tasked with finding a way to save what remained of the human race. Among them were Daniel Brooks, a man known for his practical thinking but weary demeanor, and Rachel Monroe, a scientist who had spent years studying ways to preserve life on Earth. Daniel sat at the long, circular table in the dimly lit council chamber. His face was pale under the faint glow of holographic displays that hovered above the table. Around him, other council members argued loudly, their voices echoing off the cold metal walls. Some wanted to focus on repairing Earth, while others believed leaving the planet was the only solution. Rachel leaned forward, her dark eyes scanning the data projections. She had prepared a report on Kepler-62f, a distant exoplanet identified as potentially habitable. It wasn't perfect, but it offered hope a chance to start over. "We don't have time to fix this planet," said one council member, slamming his fist on the table. "Every day we delay, more people die. We need to leave now." Rachel frowned. "There are still uncertainties about Kepler-62f," she interjected. "The data isn't complete. Rushing into this could put us in even greater danger." But her voice was drowned out by shouts of agreement from others. They wanted action, not caution. Daniel sighed deeply. He knew Rachel was right, but he also understood the desperation gripping everyone in the room. People were starving, dying from illness, and losing hope. Staying on Earth felt like waiting for death. Relocating seemed like the only option, even if it came with risks. After hours of debate, the council reached a decision. Project Exodus would begin immediately. Massive colony ships would be built to carry humanity to Kepler-62f. The plan included evacuating as many people as possible, prioritizing families, scientists, engineers, and essential workers. Everyone else would be left behind. Daniel watched silently as the vote was cast. When the decision passed, he felt a weight settle in his chest. Was this truly the best path forward, or were they making another mistake? Outside the council chamber, crowds gathered, waiting anxiously for news. When the announcement came, there was a mix of relief and sorrow. Families embraced, some crying tears of joy, others sobbing in despair. William Hayes, a young engineer chosen to work on one of the colony ships, stood beside his wife, Grace. Their infant son slept peacefully in her arms. "We're going to make it," Grace whispered, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. William nodded, but said nothing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Rachel Monroe walked through the streets later that evening, her mind racing. She had tried to warn them, but no one listened. As she looked up at the darkened sky, she wondered if humanity was running away from its problems instead of facing them. The council's decision weighed heavily on her. What if they were leading millions to their deaths? Still, there was no turning back now. Preparations for departure were already underway. Factories churned out parts for the ships, and people packed whatever belongings they could carry. The atmosphere was tense, yet eerily quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. In just a few weeks, humanity would leave Earth behind. For better or worse, they were stepping into the unknown. As Rachel returned to her lab, she glanced one last time at the cracked pavement beneath her feet. Somewhere deep inside, she hoped they hadn't made a fatal mistake. But the truth was, no. One really knew what lay ahead. The day of departure arrived sooner than anyone expected. The colony ships, towering structures of steel and glass, stood ready on launch platforms, scattered across the remnants of Earth's surface. Among them was the Elysium Dawn, one of the largest vessels in the fleet. Its sleek design shimmered under the weak sunlight that managed to pierce through the haze of dust still hanging in the air. Families lined up in orderly rows, clutching small bags filled with personal belongings, photos, keepsakes, and mementos of a life they were leaving behind. William Hayes stood near the boarding ramp of the Elysium Dawn, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn jacket. His wife, Grace, held their infant son close, rocking him gently as she whispered soothing words. William watched her face, searching for any sign of fear or doubt, but all he saw was determination. "Do you think we'll ever come back?" Grace asked suddenly, breaking the silence between them. Her voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear, over the hum of machinery around them. William hesitated before answering. He wanted to reassure her, to say something comforting, but the truth was, he didn't know. Instead, he forced a smile and said, "We've got a new start ahead of us. That's what matters." Grace nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. They stepped onto the ship together, joining the steady stream of passengers making their way inside. Inside the Elysium Dawn, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Crew members directed people to their assigned quarters, explaining safety protocols and emergency procedures. Emily Dawson, a schoolteacher who had volunteered to care for children during the journey, moved through the crowded corridors, offering smiles and kind words to nervous parents. She carried a small notebook filled with stories and games she planned to use to keep the kids entertained. As she passed a window, she paused to glance outside at the desolate landscape. The sight of crumbling buildings and empty streets sent a shiver down her spine. "Goodbye, Earth," she murmured under her breath, before continuing on her way. Rachel Monroe boarded the New Horizon, another ship in the fleet. Unlike many of the other passengers, she wasn't focused on settling into her quarters or finding comfort in familiar routines. Instead, she headed straight for the observation deck, a wide room with panoramic windows that offered a view of the planet below. She stared out at the barren terrain, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Had they made the right choice? Was Kepler 62F truly habitable, or were they walking into a trap? Rachel clenched her fists, frustration bubbling inside her. She had tried to warn the Council, but her warnings had been ignored. Now, there was nothing she could do but hope for the best. As the countdown to launch began, the mood aboard the ships shifted. Excitement mingled with anxiety, creating an odd mix of emotions among the passengers. On the Elysium Dawn, William found himself stationed in the engine control room, monitoring systems as the ship prepared for takeoff. The hum of machinery grew louder, vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. He glanced at the screens in front of him, checking readings and ensuring everything was functioning properly. When the engines roared to life, the entire ship trembled, and William felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. They were leaving Earth behind. Outside, the scene was surreal. Thousands of people gathered at a safe distance to watch the ships ascend into the sky. Some cheered, waving goodbye to loved ones aboard the vessels. Others stood silently, tears streaming down their faces. The ground shook as the first ship lifted off, its engines blazing brightly against the gray horizon. One by one, the rest of the fleet followed, climbing higher and higher until they disappeared into the clouds. Back aboard the New Horizon, Rachel watched the Earth shrink away through the observation window. The once familiar countenance faded into darkness, replaced by the vast emptiness of space. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Humanity had survived countless challenges throughout history. Perhaps this time would be no different. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a grave mistake, a mistake that might cost them everything. The fleet sailed onward, heading toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Earth drifted further away, silent and forgotten. Weeks turned into months as the fleet of colony ships sailed through the endless void of space. Life aboard the vessels settled into a rhythm, though it was far from normal. The passengers adapted to their new reality, finding ways to pass the time and cope with the isolation. On the Elysium Dawn, William Hayes spent most of his days in the engine control room, ensuring the ship's systems ran smoothly. He rarely left his post, knowing how vital his work was to the survival of everyone on board. The hum of the engines became a constant companion, a reminder of the fragile lifeline keeping them alive. Grace, his wife, adjusted to life in their small quarters. She cared for their infant son, Nathan, feeding him and singing softly to calm his cries. Sometimes she joined other mothers in the communal areas, sharing stories and laughter to ease the tension. But there were moments when Grace stared out of the tiny porthole in their room, her mind drifting back to Earth. She wondered if they had made the right decision, leaving everything behind. Would Nathan grow up to see the new world they were promised? Or would their journey end in failure? Emily Dawson found purpose in her role as a caretaker for the children on the New Horizon. Every day, she gathered them in a large common area, teaching them simple lessons and playing games to keep their spirits high. Her notebook of stories became a favorite among the kids, who eagerly listened as she read tales of adventure and bravery. One day, she told them during one session, "You'll be the heroes of your own stories." The children giggled, their imaginations sparked by her words. Yet, even Emily couldn't ignore the whispers spreading among the adults' worries about supplies running low and strange glitches in the ship's systems. Rachel Monroe kept herself busy, analyzing data and monitoring communication between the ships. She noticed subtle changes in the fleet's trajectory and grew concerned. Supplies were depleting faster than expected, and several ships reported equipment failures. When she brought these issues to Captain Lewis Carter of the Elysium Dawn, he dismissed her concerns. "We're light years from anything," he said, with a shrug. "What could possibly go wrong?" His dismissive tone frustrated Rachel, but she knew arguing wouldn't change his mind. Instead, she focused on gathering more information, hoping to uncover answers before it was too late. On board the New Horizon, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances when lights flickered or when announcements about rationing echoed through the corridors. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and uncertainty. Some claimed the Council had rushed the mission without proper preparation. Others whispered about dangers lurking in the depths of space, unseen threats waiting to strike. Emily tried to reassure the children whenever they overheard these conversations, telling them not to worry. But deep down, even she felt a growing sense of unease. One evening, William stayed late in the engine control room, running diagnostics on the navigation system. As he reviewed the data, something caught his eye: a faint, irregular signal coming from outside the ship. At first, he thought it was interference or a malfunction, but the pattern repeated itself, almost like it was deliberate. Curious, he zoomed in on the readings, his brow furrowing in confusion. Whatever it wasn't natural. William hesitated before reporting it to Captain Carter, unsure how the crew would react. When he finally mentioned it, the captain waved him off again. "Probably just cosmic noise," he muttered. "Focus on what matters." But William couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something watching them. He glanced at the dark expanse of space beyond the ship's windows, his heart pounding. Humanity had left Earth seeking a fresh start, but now, surrounded by the infinite unknown, he wondered if they had simply traded one danger for another. As the fleet sailed deeper into space, strange occurrences became more frequent. At first, they were small things: communication signals between ships growing faint or distorted, navigation systems showing minor errors, and equipment behaving unpredictably. But soon, these anomalies escalated. On board the Elysium Dawn, William Hayes noticed that the irregular signal he had detected weeks earlier was now stronger and closer. It pulsed in rhythmic patterns, almost like a heartbeat. He spent hours studying it, trying to make sense of its origin. Was it a natural phenomenon? or something else entirely. Rachel Monroe also began noticing troubling signs. She reviewed data from the fleet's sensors and discovered inconsistencies in the readings. About Kepler-62f, the planet's atmosphere seemed to contain traces of gases not present in the initial scans. These gases could be toxic to humans, making colonization far riskier than anyone had anticipated. Rachel's stomach churned as she realized the Council might have overlooked critical details in their haste to leave Earth. Determined to raise the alarm, she compiled her findings into a detailed report and requested an emergency meeting with the ship's leadership. The meeting took place in the command center of the New Horizon. Rachel stood before Captain Lewis Carter and several senior officers, explaining her concerns. "We need to reassess our approach," she said firmly, pointing to the data on a large screen. "If we proceed without understanding what we're heading into, we could be walking into a disaster." Her words hung heavy in the air, but the response was not what she hoped for. Captain Carter frowned, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "We can't afford delays," he replied. "Turning back isn't an option. We'll deal with any issues when we arrive." Rachel felt a surge of frustration. She glanced around the room, searching for support, but the other officers avoided her gaze. They were too afraid to question the mission, too desperate to cling to hope. Defeated, Rachel returned to her station, her mind racing. She knew the Council's decision to rush the evacuation had been reckless, but now it seemed they were blind to the dangers ahead. Outside the ship's windows, the vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, indifferent to humanity's plight. Meanwhile, aboard the Elysium Dawn, William continued monitoring the mysterious signal. One night, as he sat alone in the engine control room, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. A shadow moved past the ship, a massive, shifting form that blocked out the distant stars. For a moment, he froze, staring at the shape in disbelief. Then alarms blared throughout the vessel, startling him into action. "Unknown object detected," a robotic voice announced over the intercom. Panic erupted as passengers scrambled to understand what was happening. Captain Carter appeared moments later, his face pale but composed. "What do we know?" he demanded, looking at William. Before William could respond, another officer spoke up. "It's not debris or an asteroid. It's moving." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their fear palpable. Grace, holding Nathan close, joined other passengers who gathered in the corridors, whispering nervously. Emily Dawson tried to calm the children under her care, but even she couldn't hide her anxiety. The shadow loomed closer, its movements deliberate and slow. Back on the New Horizon, Rachel watched the same shadow appear near her ship. Her heart pounded as she studied it through the observation window. It wasn't just a random object. It was alive, intelligent. A chill ran down her spine as she realized humanity wasn't alone in the universe. Whatever this entity was, it had followed them across the stars. When the Council finally addressed the fleet, their message was terse and cautious. "Stay calm," they urged. "We are assessing the situation." But their words offered little comfort. Passengers huddled together, some praying, others crying. William stared at the shadow, his mind filled with questions. Why was it here? What did it want? And most importantly, was it friend or foe? Humanity had fled Earth seeking safety, but now, surrounded by the unknown, they faced a new kind of fear. The shadow lingered, massive and unyielding, its presence casting a pall of fear across the fleet. For days, it drifted silently alongside the ships, never attacking, but never leaving either. Passengers aboard the Elysium Dawn, and the Asterisk knew. Horizon Asterisk whispered nervously about what it might be. Some believed it was an alien predator, stalking them through space. Others thought it was a warning, a sign that humanity's journey to Kepler-62f was doomed from the start. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, filling the air with tension. Rachel Monroe refused to sit idly by. She spent hours in the science lab aboard the New Horizon, analyzing every piece of data she could gather about the mysterious entity. Her instruments detected faint electromagnetic pulses emanating from it, almost like signals. At first they seemed random, but as she studied them more closely, patterns began to emerge, patterns that resembled language. Rachel's heart raced. Could this thing communicate? If so, maybe there was a way to understand it and, perhaps, even reason with it. She shared her findings with Captain Lewis Carter, who listened skeptically. "You think this thing is trying to talk to us?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Rachel nodded firmly. "It's intelligent," she insisted. "We need to respond. Ignoring it could make things worse." After some hesitation, Carter agreed to let her try. With the help of William Hayes and a small team of engineers, Rachel set up a makeshift communication system using the ship's transmitters. They sent out simple signals, mathematical sequences, and basic binary codes, hoping the entity would recognize them as an attempt to connect. Days passed without a response. Just as doubt began to creep in, something extraordinary happened. The shadow shifted closer, and a series of pulses returned, mimicking the patterns Rachel had sent. Excitement rippled through the crew. "It's working," Rachel breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. Over the next few hours, the exchanges grew more complex. By decoding the responses, Rachel pieced together fragments of information. The entity called itself Avon. Avon revealed that it had been observing humanity for centuries, intrigued by their resilience and adaptability, but it also expressed concern. Through fragmented messages, Avon described Earth's devastation, citing it as evidence of humanity's destructive tendencies. "Why do you flee your home?" Avon asked through the transmissions. "Will you bring harm to others?" Rachel struggled to answer. How could she explain centuries of human history, the wars, the greed, the mistakes in simple terms? Instead, she focused on the present. "We seek a new beginning," she transmitted. "Our world is dying. We have no choice but to leave." Response was slow in coming. When it finally arrived, it carried a tone of sadness. "Your kind carries chaos within you," it said. "Yet I see hope. Prove yourselves worthy." The message sparked heated debates among the council members. Daniel Brooks argued that Avon's words were a warning they couldn't ignore. "This changes everything," he said during an emergency meeting. "If we push forward blindly, we risk angering something far more powerful than us." Others dismissed his concerns, insisting they couldn't afford to delay reaching Kepler 6 to F. Supplies were dwindling, and morale was fragile. Turning back wasn't an option. Grace Hayes watched the discussions unfold from her quarters, cradling Nathan in her arms. She felt torn between hope and despair. William, too, wrestled with conflicting emotions. He admired Rachel's efforts to communicate with Avon, but worried about what might happen if the entity turned hostile. Emily Dawson, meanwhile, did her best to shield the children from the growing unease. She told them stories of brave explorers facing unknown dangers, emphasizing courage and perseverance. Despite Avon's warnings, the council decided to press onward. They pleaded with the entity for safe passage to Kepler 6 to F, promising to coexist peacefully. Avon hesitated, its pulses slowing, as if considering their request. Finally, it responded. "Your path holds peril greater than you know," it said, "but I will not stop you. Choose wisely." As the fleet resumed its course, Rachel stared out at the stars, her mind heavy with questions. Had they made the right decision? Or were they walking into another catastrophe? One thing was certain. Humanity's fate no longer rested solely in their hands. Avon watched silently, a guardian or perhaps a judge of their uncertain future.